Chapter 12 from Anyhow Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Anyhow Stories by Lucy Lane Clifford, Chapter 12. In the Porch. They sat down in the porch, the two women and the boy, and the stranger who had come from the country. The old woman was spinning, and the young one was sewing, and the stranger was watching the rain clouds gather. The boy was turning over the leaves of a book in which the lives of great men were written down. "I would give the world to know a great man," he said, and the spinner looked up and answered, "Ah, it is a grand thing. One feels one knows the world when one knows a great man." "And what is greatness?" asked the woman from the country. And then they were all silent, each wondering how the others would answer. And at last the boy spoke again, looking round at the women. "Have any of you known a great man?" he asked. And again they were silent. But presently the spinner said, "When I was young, there was a rich man living in the town. He must have been great, for he was very rich, and over his grave there stands a tall marble monument." "And what did he do?" asked the boy. "I don't know what he did, but once when he was young he had no money, so he set to work, and he worked and worked hard, so that long before he was middle age he became very rich, and then he built a great house and lived in it, and kept grand horses and carriages, and when he drove through town all the people looked after him with wonder." "But what good deeds did he do?" asked the boy, "and what great things?" "I never heard of any good deeds," the spinner answered. "He had no time to think of the poor, or to fight battles as the heroes did. But he worked hard to become rich, and he had all things that money could buy." "It is a good thing to work," said the woman from the country. "And was he learned?" asked the boy. "Ah, I do not know," the spinner said. "He may have been, but he had his business to think of, and he did not talk much, or write books, or paint pictures, or teach others. None can tell how much he knew." "And had he many friends?" "He had little time to make friends, and none knew him well, but sometimes rich men sat at his table and ate and drank, and invited him to their houses, but he had little time to go, and little to say when he went, for he had to think of all the ways of making money so that his riches might exceed those of other men." "And had he wife and children?" "Oh no," said the spinner, shaking her head sadly. "He had no time to give to his affections, and his heart had no room for them." "And for what did he work?" "He worked to become rich, and to live among the things that money buys, and so that, if he chose, he might live at ease. He was a great man to win all these things for himself." "And who loved him?" "There were none who loved him, but some feared him, and many longed to be as rich as he." "And had he never lived? What then?" "Dear lad, I cannot tell. Another would have been in his place, and the money that he earned would have been in other hands, but I cannot tell in whose." "And what was the good of him?" "I do not know, but he was a great man, and when he died he left the directions for a grand marble tomb." "And what was the good of that?" asked the boy. "Ah, lad, if our name is written in no human heart, and none care to remember it, and if there are no books and no deeds called after us, is it not a great thing to have it written up on marble? It would be sad indeed if there were no room anywhere on earth for it. There was room on a marble tomb for his." "Did any weep for him?" "No, there were none to weep for him, but the marble monument is there, tall and fine." "Do any remember him?" "Few remember him, and none care to think of him. But there are some distant cousins of his in a far-off land, and these spend his money. They had no need of it, and they never saw his face, but they spend his money with a lavish hand, all the gold and silver which he had heaped up. Oh, he was a great man, and very rich." And then the spinner was silent. "And now tell me," said the boy, turning to the young woman, "did you ever know a great man?" I have known so few people," she answered thoughtfully. She was silent for a few minutes, and then spoke again. "When I was a little girl," she said, "there was a poor woman who lodged for a time in my mother's cottage. She was very poor. She had only a few clothes and a little shoe that her father, who was a cobbler, had left unfinished when he died, and she had an old sampler which she had worked when she was a child. One day she showed the little shoe to the village cobbler, and I think he always worked better afterwards, for he said he had never seen work better done than the work that was in the unfinished shoe, and he felt ashamed of his own bad stitches. When the woman had been a year in my mother's house, she died, and left my mother all she had, just the old clothes, and the little shoe, and the sampler. On the sampler there was worked the name and age of the worker, Sarah Short, aged 7 years, and right at the bottom there was written on the frame, 'I have tried to work this well, for Daddy said good work lives on forever.' And my mother told me to take these words to heart, and then she hung the sampler up over the fireplace in our little sitting room. And one day, just a few years ago, an artist came to my mother's cottage and asked if he could lodge there for the summer while he painted a picture. So we made room for him, and every day he went out to paint the view from the hillside. He was not strong when he came, and he was sorely disheartened about his work, for he was poor and no one bought his pictures. Though he tried very hard to paint his best, no one seemed to care for them or to notice them. He was almost in despair when he came, and beginning to think that it was of no use working well, or hoping for good things to come. After a bit he lost patience with the picture he was painting, for it took so much time, and he was not sure that any would buy it, or that those who cared for pictures would ever see it, so he put it away and began painting portraits of the village folk. He painted many, and there was one delicate child whose little face he painted just for the love of it. And because he loved the child, he took so much pains with the portrait that he did it better than all the others, and those who saw it stood for a long time looking at the pale little face and the large blue eyes, and then I think they fell to thinking of things far better than themselves. At last there were no more portraits to paint, and the painter seemed to lose all heart again, and he used to take a book and go to the woods and spend the whole day in reading. My mother was grieved for him, for she saw that he was poor, and that fame and money would be very sweet to him. One day," the young woman stopped for a moment and looked up at the boy, scarcely seeing him, but thinking of the days that were gone and living once more in them. "It seems like yesterday," she said with a sigh, and then went on. "One day, when he was going out, and had to pass as usual through our little sitting room, his eye caught the old sampler hanging up over the fireplace, and he went up to it and looked at it, and then he read the words beneath, 'Good work lives on forever.' He read them and turned away, and then went back and read them again. The next morning he took the unfinished picture to the hillside again, and worked at it with a will to which he had been a stranger many a day. He worked at it every day, oh so carefully. Many a bit he painted out and painted in again, and many a night he was dissatisfied with his whole day's work, but still he went on, and on. It seemed as if there was something in his heart that he painted right into the picture, and besides this, he painted all he saw, and at last when it was done, and one looked at it, one fancied one could hear the birds sing, and feel the sweet summer air coming from the south. I always thought when I saw it," continued the woman, "that it was a blessed thing for us all to live in so beautiful a world, and a sin and sorrow when we did anything to disgrace it. There are few of us," she added, "who can do things worthy of it. That is too great a happiness for many of us to reach." At last the painter went away, and we heard no more of him for a long time, not till the next year, and then news came that everyone was talking of his pictures, that they were hanging in the exhibition, and were counted the best there, and the pictures were the view from the hillside, and the portrait of the little child, and we were all so proud and happy in the village, thinking of the grand people who would see our child's face, and the view of our own countryside that we had known all our lives. After that,